Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Big Tent, where political merchants come to trade. Hosted by Circus Bazaar Magazine and produced by Circus Bazaar Productions, where truth is stranger than fiction.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. Ich bin ein Berliner.
Join the progressive body.
We've had a problem here.
Obviously, being a woman in public life.
An iron curtain has descended across the country.
Hi there, people. Welcome to episode 5 of Circus Bazaar Magazine's The Big Tent podcast by Circus Bazaar Productions. This is our slightly overdue first podcast of 2019. It's our intention to produce at least 8 podcasts this year, so more should be coming very soon. We're now available on iTunes, YouTube, SoundCloud, Google Play, and Spotify. Further, if you're interested in our historically and politically focused magazine, you can visit circusbazaar.com. And if you want to understand more about our more commercially orientated operations, be sure to visit us at circusbazaarproductions.com. Both of the links will be left in the description. Before I get started today, we need to fully disclose any conflicts of interest we might have here in regard to our upcoming guest, Michael Blaize. Michael is the founder of a company called XWind that developed an uber technologically advanced form of vertical axis wind turbine. The short story is that this technology has now changed hands and is being further developed by an Australian company of which CB Magazine's mother company, CB Group, has a financial interest in. So in reality, this podcast is as much about having a chat with an interesting fellow about his technology as it is about giving this technology a platform. Environmentalism is something that I think most of us are to varying degrees passionate about, and the fact that we're putting some effort and resource behind the development of wind power technology is something that we're quite proud of, and that helps in my mind to mitigate the obvious conflict. Aside from this though, Michael is an aerodynamic engineer that spent a former career working on Formula 1 teams. He's worked with Renault, Jordan, and British American Racing, and spent several years working directly with Alain Prost, aka the Professor, back in the 2000s. He eventually made a transition away from making F1 cars faster to transforming wind into energy by utilising the same technologically advanced methods and skill set from his former industry. The result has been a rocky but really interesting ride, and it's our hope that the technology that he got started continues to grow and plays a future role in the renewable energy market. Michael will tell us the rest, so here we go. Hi Michael, it's a real pleasure to have you on the podcast. First of all, why don't you just give a little bit of an explanation about who you are?
Hi Shane, thanks for the opportunity to join you this morning and tell you a bit more about myself and XWind. Yes, so I'm French. I live in the UK. I've been living here since '99. I'm an engineer. Graduated from a French school back in '96. I had always had a passion for engineering, fast cars, and that brought me to the UK back in '99, where I started to work in F1.
Okay, yeah. See, it's a real pleasure to interview someone that's got some experience in Formula 1 engineering. So, what exactly did you do in that field?
Yes, so I trained as an aerodynamicist or aerospace engineer. My first job was actually in aerospace. So I was designing the car back at the factory using a wind tunnel or CFD to make the car go quicker.
Okay, so what Formula 1 teams were you working for?
Well, being French, I worked for the Prost team back in the 2000s. I worked for Jordan, British American Racing.
Okay, so
well.
Did you actually know Alain Prost?
Yes, I worked with him for a couple of years. Yeah.
Oh, that's very cool, man. So, I mean, and those years were the golden era of Formula 1 as far as I'm concerned. See, I'm from Adelaide. And so was the Adelaide Formula 1 Grand Prix the last Grand Prix of the year?
It used to be the first one. It used to be the opening Grand Prix of the season back in those days. Yeah.
Yeah, so my whole childhood was characterised by sitting out in the backyard in Australian summer, and we could hear the Formula 1 cars like going around the track for the whole week through practice right up to the great race. And my father's company would sponsor it, and so we were. Yeah, it was a fantastic thing. I love Formula 1.
Mm-hmm.
So what enabled you to make the transition away from Formula 1 though into wind energy?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I had a great passion for speed and cars. At the same time, when you spend so many hours at work, and Formula One is a very demanding industry, you spend 6 days a week, if not 7 days a week, working very hard, 12 hours a day. And I thought that if I was to work that hard, I should actually do it for myself, which is the reason why, first of all, I decided to leave an industry that I loved so much. And my first company was actually a supercar company. We designed, developed, and tested a supercar, a 3-seater supercar, back in was it 94, 95? But when I did that, having my own company and managing project management, quality, the design of it, the workforce around it, made me realize that these kind of skills can be applied to other industries. So you've got general management, but there's also composite and aerodynamic design. And when the recession kicked in back in 97, doing a supercar project was not the best thing to be doing. And I looked at the other industries, and wind was one that really piqued my interest, doing something for the environment, but also using my skill set to the best effect, coming back to aerodynamics and composites, which are the two main components of a wind turbine.
So are you a passionate advocate of renewable technologies?
Yeah, you could say so. I mean, I worked nearly 10 years in that industry, and I wanted to do more than what I was doing.
Before we go any further, I just want to clarify something. I've been doing a lot of reading on Vawt technology and Hort technology, but how do I pronounce it? Is it acceptable for me to say Vawt and Hort, or do I need to use it as the acronym and say HAWT or VAWT?
No, you pronounce it Vawt or Hort.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool. I'll edit this bit out to prevent me from seeming too stupid. So I understand that initially your involvement was with Hort Designs. So just to the uneducated listener, horizontal axis wind turbines are the standard turbines that you'll see out in the fields in Denmark and across different parts of the world. But Vawt Designs that you're specializing in, can you just explain what the difference is between the normal stand-up windmills and Vawt?
Yes. So, I mean, horizontal axis turbines are the ones that you will see throughout the world. They are the ones that have been developed the most, have had the most investment. And in a way, they are a lot easier to design than a vertical axis wind turbine, because when the wind hits the blades, it does it in a straight fashion, and it's quite easy to actually calculate the wing angularity and the performance of the blades. With a vertical axis wind turbine, it's a lot more complex because the blade crosses the wind twice, first head on, and then there's another round when it goes around at the back. And the angle of attack of the blade changes through the revolution, which means that you have very high angle of attack and then optimum angle of attack over a full cycle. So in a way, the optimizing a vertical axis wind turbine is a lot more difficult than an horizontal axis wind turbine.
So what do you think the main reason is for Hort designs, apart from the complexity of the design, for the fact that they dominate the market?
But as I said, they are a lot more simple to design, which means that in terms of understanding how they work, and you can do hand calculations or semi-empirical calculations very easily without having to resort to complex CFD simulations to actually understand what is going on with the wind turbine. You can adapt an horizontal axis wind turbine because you can pitch the blades. You can keep the blade in its optimum position all the time. So you don't have to deal with, or you have less extent of a separated flow or complex flow structures on a horizontal axis wind turbine than a vertical axis.
So why did you decide on developing Vawt technology?
Well, at the time when I started to look at vertical axis wind turbine, I was working for Vestas Wind System, which is the largest manufacturer of horizontal axis wind turbines, and it was very apparent that the resistance of people of having wind turbines close to where they live, and the tendency was to go larger and offshore. So larger amount of power, but away from the public eye. And the vertical axis wind turbines seemed to me underdeveloped when I looked at it, because the performance of those designs was quite significantly lower to the horizontal axis wind turbines. But they did appeal a lot more to the eye, and they look like a sculpture, which is a lot more appealing to people and would be more acceptable to be placed closer to the public. So I think when I looked at it, I thought that there was a gap in the market for that kind of turbines. I didn't jump into it straight away. What I did is I looked at it and I thought, can I make a vertical axis wind turbine that performs as well as an horizontal axis? Because at the end of the day, a wind turbine is not just a green statement. The people that buy wind turbines do it for only one purpose, and it is to generate revenue. So if your performance is not as good as what is currently the benchmark, the horizontal axis wind turbine, then you don't stand a chance. So the first year I spent optimizing the vertical axis wind turbine for performance, and within a few months managed to get it to the same level as an horizontal axis wind turbine, which was a first for a vertical axis wind turbine.
What do you think is... Many would argue that Vawt technology is uncompetitive. So you're saying that you've been able to match the performance of a Vawt with a Hort design?
That's correct. I think many people rely on the fact that, yes, it is true. For the last 20, 30 years, horizontal axis wind turbines have been optimized quite successfully, and they've reached 48, maybe some designs might reach 50% efficiency, aerodynamic efficiency. And because vertical axis wind turbines didn't get the same kind of attention, and also, as I said at the very beginning of this interview, they are a lot more difficult to grasp, and you can't optimize them in the same way as you do with an horizontal axis wind turbine. It's a lot more complex product, so to get the best out of it was a lot more difficult, and nobody applied the same kind of technology that we did here, which is basically taking the same kind of philosophy that I've used in Formula One, where you basically parameterize a design challenge and you throw computational resources at it until you find an optimum design.
So is there any domains in which you think Vawt has a comparative advantage over Hort technology?
Yes. So if you can get it to the same level of performance, then it opens up the fact that it's artistically more pleasing. But there's also a few other advantages, and the two most significant ones are acoustics. It rotates slower than an horizontal axis wind turbine, so it generates less noise, which again is very appealing if you want to site those turbines closer to the public. And then the second one is that it's a lot more simple design mechanically, because you don't have any pitching mechanism. So all the pitch, the yaw mechanism that you've got on an horizontal axis wind turbine doesn't exist on a vertical axis. So it means that your mechanical stack can be a lot more simple and obviously a lot more cost efficient.
So you were working for an established wind company. What made you choose to go off on your own with a new company rather than try to develop Vawt within the company you're working with?
There's two elements to that. First of all, I'm an entrepreneur at heart, and I love agile, small companies, and I loved what I did when we had the supercar startup. So going off and jumping into a startup, creating a new product from scratch, developing a new team to develop it is something that really appeals to me. And then second, Vestas is a very large company. You are talking about 20,000 people, 8 billion euro revenue. And the medium wind market is booming, but you are talking about hundreds of millions of pounds, which is not very appealing to a giant like Vestas, whose core technology is very different. So the technology, the teams that they would have had to develop, the investment that they would have to make to generate a 1% improvement on their revenue, it was not going to work.
So what was your vision when you first established XWind Power?
The vision was to establish a small company that would operate in the same way as a large company. So what I mean is that when you look at the wind turbine industry, apart from the very big players, Vestas, GE, all the rest is very, and I don't want to be pejorative, but it's very much a glorified boat building industry. The quality is very poor. The design technology is not very good. And what we wanted to do is have a company that operates like an automotive company, using Six Sigma methodologies, robust project management, risk management, processes in places everywhere. So we had the technology that was issued from F1, and then we had all the processes that came from the automotive industry or large wind into a very small structure that was playing into a different marketplace, producing for the first time, or aiming to produce a quality product. Because if you want to generate revenue for your customers with a wind turbine, you need very near to 100% uptime, and all the small wind turbines and medium wind turbines are not reaching that goal.
But do you believe that XWind Power's product would have reached that goal?
Yes, we had all the processes in place to reach that goal, yes.
So just give us a walkthrough of the project as it developed. Like, who were the initial stakeholders?
So initially, it was only me and Stephen Crosher, who came from a small wind turbine company. And so basically, it was me from large wind, automotive, F1, and then Stephen from small wind. And where we met is that we strongly believed in the medium wind segment, whereby it is extremely difficult to generate strong revenue and develop a company on the back of small wind. The wind turbines are too small. People want to put them in areas which are not ideal in terms of wind resources. And then you've got large wind, which is too large and people don't want to get close to them. So the middle ground was medium wind. So we wanted to develop an 100 kilowatt wind turbine, which was large enough to generate significant revenue and power, but not too small so that the project can't do with a proper wind resource mapping and things like that.
But you had two products mapped out, an 80 kilowatt version and a 6 kilowatt version? Is that correct?
That's correct. So the 6 kilowatt is too small, and it was meant to be a proof of concept product. So yes, the 6 kilowatt would have fit into the small wind segment. But as I said, we clearly or very quickly identified the fact that we couldn't create or develop a serious company on the back of a small product like that.
Okay, so what's the average kilowatt output of a standard Vawt technology wind turbine?
Well, you don't have to differentiate horizontal and vertical in that instance. You can, if you've got the same efficiency or capacity factor, you can generate the same amount of energy as if you're using an horizontal axis or a vertical axis wind turbine.
Okay, but there's been talk about putting Vawt technology on top of telecommunications towers.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the type of market that you'd be looking at for the 80 kilowatt edition?
Yes, so we had two main target market when we created the 80 kilowatt. The first one was powering railways. So we had a project approved at Network Rail to power the railway lines, and that was project number one. And then the second project was telecommunication, either using the 6 or the 80 kilowatts. So the telecommunication project was the only project that would actually justify a volume manufacturing of the 6 kilowatt turbine. So we were not entertaining selling 6 kilowatts to private owners, but we were entertaining powering 10,000s of masts in India, for example, used for telecom applications.
Your company, it attracted quite a lot of government support and grants.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the uniqueness of your design that warranted this type of support?
The support was very much due to the innovative nature of the turbine and the fact that for the very first time a vertical axis wind turbine was operating at the same kind of efficiency as an horizontal axis wind turbine.
From a technological perspective, do you think this is the greatest achievement of the project in its entirety? Just the efficiency rating?
The efficiency rating is what is the tip of the iceberg of what we actually created in a couple of years, or 3 years. That's the greatest achievement that we've made. But we had so many other things in the pipeline in terms of control strategies and the way the turbine is actually manufactured. So the mechanical stack was actually very different to a normal vertical axis wind turbine. A normal vertical axis wind turbine has bearing at the top and the bottom, which is not ideal in terms of manufacturing and control of the stack. We had a very different bearing arrangement that would have simplified the whole structure and reduced cost quite significantly. In the same way, the generator and the brakes, the braking system on the vertical axis wind turbines are usually also quite complex and over-dimensioned to cope with the fact that we can't feather the blades like an horizontal axis wind turbine. That's one of the drawbacks of a vertical axis wind turbine. But we had a patent pendings for a different way of generating the braking, which again would have solved a lot of the problems with original vertical axis wind turbine designs. So yes, the aerodynamic efficiency is what we created at the beginning. That's what we patented successfully as well internationally. But we had quite a few other things in the pipeline to make it a very compelling product.
I've been doing a little bit of research on the testing practices around wind turbines and other technologies, and there seems to be a little bit of a divide between those that would prefer to do physical testing in wind tunnels and those that rely more heavily on computer simulation to derive results. As I understand it, you're in the second camp.
I would not see it like that because you can't test a wind turbine in a wind tunnel. The wind tunnels are too small to even cope with the smallest wind turbines. As soon as you go past a 5 kilowatt turbine, you can't test them in a wind tunnel. So what you are talking about is either you test the wing profiles in a wind tunnel, and then you do CFD, and then you go to field testing. But there's no such thing as evaluating the performance of a wind turbine in a wind tunnel versus CFD. Any respectable manufacturer, Vestas, GE, all the big ones, will do all their development based on CFD. If you're talking about full wind turbine development, full blade development, and then they will manufacture the product, and then they will verify the power curve in the field. Because again, when you are our turbine was small enough that you could actually make a mistake and redo it. But the big guys who are making 5 megawatt wind turbines, just the molds to make the prototype blades cost 50 million to make. So you can't make a mistake. But at the same time, you can't test it before you actually put it in the field. So the technologies you have to rely on are, yes, wind tunnel testing for the actual wing profile, but that's it. After that, it's all CFD based.
Is this somewhat similar to the process you'd go through in Formula One innovation?
Yes and no, because for a Formula One car, you can actually test in the wind tunnel and you can replicate the way the car is going to behave on the track in the wind tunnel. So you can actually have both CFD and wind tunnel working hand in hand, where it's different for a wind turbine because you only get real field data when you have your first prototype.
But you did do some physical testing with the 6 kilowatt prototype, right?
That's correct. So we did the whole development using CFD, like any large manufacturer would do. And then with the 6 kilowatts, we did some physical testing at the very start of the project.
And what were the results of that?
We didn't have an ideal location for the test, and the product was very much a proof of concept in terms of, does the technology work? And for example, does the wind turbine self-start? So we haven't been through the disadvantages of vertical axis wind turbine. I mentioned braking system and coping with the fact that the blades cannot be yawed out of the wind. The second drawback is most of the vertical axis wind turbine don't self-start, and you have to power them at the very beginning when the wind is too low or when the wind picks up. And that's true of a lot of vertical axis wind turbine designs, but ours is using a perfect helical shape, which meant that it could pick up wind from any directions and start to rotate without being powered. So, for example, one of the key things that we wanted to identify with the testing was, does the technology actually self-start like we predicted it would? And it did. So that was one of the key takeaway. One of the issues, the thing is that with field testing, a lot of people are saying, I only rely on field testing. But at the same time, getting accurate data with wind, which is a very unpredictable thing, with wind profiles that changes from 1 second to another, is actually very difficult. So what you end up doing is actually averaging the performance over an amount of time. And over that amount of time, you might have a lot of variations. And we did gather some data, but not a lot. And it was not enough to actually quantify accurately the aerodynamic efficiency of the design. But we did get some peak data that suggested that we were in the right ballpark with the CFD data.
The 6 kilowatt prototype self-destructed, correct?
That's correct. So one of the advantages of being able to self-start is that you don't need to use any power to rotate the turbine. The problem is that if the turbine is not properly parked and there is a high wind coming on the turbine, then you might be in trouble. So the turbine, we operated the turbine for about 6 months, and it was the very beginning of the company. And to actually make the turbine and generate the data, we used 10% of what other wind turbine manufacturer might have used to actually do this. And some of the methods that we used at the very beginning could have been better. And for example, the parking of the turbine was done with a simple rope attached to the rotor to prevent it from rotating. And it did a perfect job for the first 6 months. And then at the beginning of, I can't remember the exact year, was it 2018 was it? The UK experienced a very high wind period for about 2-3 days, and it was a very high. I mean, it was a 50-year type incident. So the wind was extremely high, and the turbine actually had a lot of self-starting capabilities apparently. So it was actually strong enough to cut the rope and accelerate on its own. And because it was not meant to be operating, it was not plugged into the network and couldn't control itself. So it basically went into overspeed and destroyed itself.
Okay, so it was during the development of that 80 kilowatt prototype that XWind went into administration.
Yes.
How do you explain the reasons for the company ending up in this situation? Because I think that there is a little bit of apprehension based on the fact that it might have had something to do with the design itself.
Mm-hmm. When we were developing the technology, because we were a small company, we were very reliant on grants and investor money. The original investors were all UK-based and very much following the UK market. They were not large investors, but they were good enough for what we needed at the very start of the project. And because we were good at generating grant money, we actually didn't need that much equity investment. And the challenges that we experienced were political. So following the general election, was it back in 2012 or 13? I can't remember the exact year. There was a very sharp change in the green agenda. And it was very clear that onshore wind was not going to be supported in the same way as it used to be. And for example, all the feed tariffs were cut from one day to the next. They were divided by 4 or something, which meant that a lot of the investors and a lot of the people involved in the wind market got cold feet. So our investors were cautious. They were reluctant at putting more money into the company. But at the same time, because feed-in tariff help in terms of getting traction into the market, but because our efficiency was good in the same way as the large wind turbines, we knew that we didn't need a large feed-in tariff to actually make a profit and generate revenue for our customers. So it was not looking that bad for us. It would actually be good because it would kill all the small and all the product that would not be performing very well. However, some of the grants that we were receiving were from the government, and one of the main supporters of the project at the very beginning was the Kent County Council. One of the reasons why we moved the company from the Isle of Wight, where we started the company, to Kent. Unfortunately, after the general election, and because of some of the non-green agenda of some people on the board of the Kent County Council, they withdrew the grant support again from one day to the next, after we only received 10% of the promised money. And that alone, the changes in the political agenda after the general election, but also very importantly, the withdrew from that grant, then became very, very difficult to explain for us. Every time we had an investor interested, loved the technology, loved the company, loved what we did. However, when it came to explain how a government body that was meant to be putting in £1 million into the company withdrew its funding after only giving 10% of it, even though we had a 300-page report that explained exactly why that happened. You only need a very small amount of uncertainty to lose interest from investors. And within the amount of time we had, which was only a few months to turn around the situation, we just couldn't do it with that baggage.
Did you try looking for investors abroad?
We did, but again, the window was so small. We had a few months to overturn the situation. And as I said, we had a good investor base in the UK with the ones that invested in the first round. But the UK investor market is very, very reluctant in terms of risk. And the risk profile went up very quickly with us. And we couldn't generate the amount of equity investment we needed from one day to the next very quickly. It just wouldn't happen.
So in summary, at that point when the company went into administration, what level had you achieved? I mean, would have you said you'd verified both designs or half verified one design? Or
well, when the 6 kilowatt prototype was destroyed, we decided that we didn't want to invest any more money in a 6 kilowatt design because yes, we could make more, generate more data, trying to verify the efficiency a little bit more. But in the same way as you've got people saying, "Oh, you haven't tested, you only have tested in CFD, you haven't done a full verification in the field," straight away the next hurdle becomes, "Oh, you've only verified that 6 kilowatt. How are you sure it's going to actually work at 80 kilowatt?" And the product we wanted to work was the 80 kilowatt. It was the one that would generate revenue for the company and would be a hit in the market. So it was the one to actually devote all the attention, all the money to. So straight away, when the 6 kilowatt design was destroyed, we jumped onto the 80 kilowatt, and we started to. The aerodynamics were slightly different, so we updated the aerodynamics for the 80 kilowatt, and we started to manufacture the first 2 prototypes, which were meant to be installed on the Network Rail site, which was going to be our first customer. And
So had there not been an election and government grants had have continued and the investor base had have been maintained, what would have been your next steps?
So when the company closed its door, we had 2 80 kilowatts, which were 50% there. And we were only, 6 months, another 6 months, and we would have had the first prototype up and running. So the next stage would have been to read the power curve. So that would have then enabled us to start selling. As soon as we had a portfolio of potential customers, more than 10 people that were actually waiting for power curves before placing a firm order. So that would have been enough to secure those orders.
So, I mean, clearly, going back a few questions, I mean, you're clearly passionate about the fact that you employed Six Sigma design principles and the use of computer design technology. Can you just elaborate on why you're so passionate about this in relationship to the wind industry?
As I mentioned, if you want to have a competitive turbine, yes, you need to have aerodynamic efficiency. Then you need to have a good mechanical stack, so it's reliable and it's efficient again as well when you transform the kinetic energy down to electric energy. But you need to have an uptime which is above 98%. And you're not talking about a few years. It's not a car that needs to operate well between service intervals. It's a design that needs to sustain wind, cold, rain, sand in some instances for 20, 25 years. And people don't actually appreciate the fact that it's a very, very significant challenge. And when I said that the small and medium wind energy segment was very much like a boat building industry, there's a lot of people that make a wind turbine out of their shed, test it for a few years, and yes, it works all right. But then when you put it into a field and it has to stay there for 20 years, it is a very significant challenge to do it well. And the only way to do that is the same way as when you design a plane. You cannot have it crash. It cannot have any problems when it flies. So we use the same kind of technology that you are using in aeronautics and automotive. So that we were aiming for a service interval, so people going to the wind turbine every 5 years. At the moment, in medium wind, it's 1 year, but it's not uncommon to hear about monthly visits.
So, to conclude, what's your take on the future of renewable energy and, in particular, wind energy?
Well, I think unless somebody picks up what we did and make it a success, the horizontal wind turbines are still getting the best part of the market, and that trend of getting larger, bigger, but further away from the population is probably going to carry on. So offshore wind is probably going to carry on developing further with large-scale horizontal axis wind turbines.
And so you don't believe that small to medium wind is hugely profitable in the future with regard to sort of domestic installations or on-land installations? I
don't believe in domestic applications, and the reason is that you are too close to buildings. One of the things that I very much aligned with Stephen when we created XWind is that we didn't want to create another urban wind company. A lot of people came to us and said, "Oh, yes, I love your design. Can I put it on the roof of this building or put it there?" And we said, no, that's not what we are about. If you want a wind turbine to work, it needs to be in clean wind in a location that has good wind resource. It doesn't work in a city. It doesn't work in close proximity with buildings. And if you do that, then you're going to end up with customers that are not happy with the product. And that's what happened with Quiet Revolution. Quiet Revolution is a similar design to what we had. They developed their technology a few years before us. It was a 3-bladed vertical axis wind turbine design. It had a few drawbacks. It has some weaknesses, but they tried to generate revenue very quickly, and they did a few green statement installations in location that meant that they didn't have good wind resource. So they ended up with customers or with turbines that didn't spin and that were stationary for most of the time, and that didn't do any good publicity to their company and to the vertical axis wind turbines in general.
This is why you were interested in powering railway lines, so they could be in sort of rural, non-domestic areas.
Yes, and we were going to use the 80 kilowatt, which is significantly higher above the ground than what a 6 kilowatt would be. And
so just out of curiosity, to power like a basic railway line, how far do these wind turbines need to be as far as intervals?
We were looking at 5-meter interval.
5-meter interval?
Yeah, but you wouldn't have them all the way along. You would have them in clusters of 5 turbines. We did the calculations, and it's a long time ago now, but to generate, I think it was 70% of their energy requirement, we only needed to install turbines along 10% of the railway. You don't need to cover the whole railway in turbines to actually generate a significant amount of energy.
All right, Michael. Well, this has been a really interesting conversation. And I'd like to wish you the best of luck in the future. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And good luck with everything.
Great. Thanks, Shane, for the opportunity to speak with you.